Shalom. Welcome to Lights of the Nations. Returning to our studies in Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, Chachot Beit HaBechira, the Rambam's great work of halacha regarding the construction of the temple. We actually have two more halachot in chapter 4. I think we're going to be finishing up with today. And essentially, for some time now, in this chapter, we've been basically studying a floor plan for the temple. And I think that one of the things that we've come to appreciate is the great detail involved in the construction and the very fact that all of this information has been preserved with such painstaking care. It has come down to us. One of the things that I try to emphasize is the fact that when it comes to this particular aspect of the floor plan of the actual construction, the Rambam has a very unique opinion about some things, quite different from that of other major commentaries, even as far as the actual shape of the sanctuary and as far as the location of the cells and all sorts of things. Again, when we come to apply these things practically, when we come to actually draw up these plans and work with planners and architects today who use sophisticated and modern techniques of development and design and computer-generated images, we're in a unique position, perhaps the most unique position in history, to be able to refine and discern and really to be able to bring about even synthesis, or certainly at the very least to be able to bring about a clarification amongst these opinions as to their practical application and who really is right, what works. And sometimes a question of who is right is a question of what actually works on the ground. And of course, our course of study at the moment in the great writings of Maimonides and everything that he has invested here with the workings of the operative aspects of rebuilding of the temple. Again, rebuilding. This is not just a record of the Second Temple. This is specifically guiding us towards our ability to rebuild. And can't help mention to you also, I'm just thinking about this particular moment in time where we are going to be reading the Torah portion of Bishalach in Exodus 18, the Song of the Sea. There's an important verse there. There's a verse that tells us that, as our sages emphasize, the meaning of the verse, where the children of Israel, at the splitting of the sea, sang out to Hashem, "You have brought them in and planted them in the mountain, O Lord, of your inheritance." And the idea being expressed there is that really you could even say that the whole point, the whole purpose of the great miracles of the Exodus and coming out of Egyptian bondage and the splitting of the sea, all towards the goal of coming into the land of Israel for the building of the temple. And we've tried to be consistent in pointing out that the study of the temple, as specific and as perhaps particular as it is such a basic central theme to our faith and to who we are, not only to our identity but to our destiny in the world. And specifically today, again, as you know, there are forces that are aligned against Israel and against the spirit of Israel and everything that Israel represents in the world to try and wrench us away from who we are, from our national identity and our spiritual identity, and really to try to drive a wedge between us and our goal of really, on one foot, what is the goal of the Jewish people according to the Torah? It's to elevate all of humanity, to be an agent, to be a tool that would be used by God to bring a sense of divine purpose and connection to godliness into every aspect of life. That's what the Jewish people are supposed to be doing in this world and nothing else. And the temple is part of that equation. And this is everything that we are studying about now. So on the one hand, as we read in the Torah portion, this verse, bringing them in and planting them in the mountain of your inheritance, this is the goal. And seeing, again, the powers that are aligning themselves against Israel to try to prevent this from happening, we understand more than ever with such great clarity how timely our study is. This is not academics, and it's not about amassing more and more knowledge. It's about knowing exactly what to do in very practical terms. So it has all of the qualities of classic Torah study as far as the reward that we accrue, as far as the closeness that it gives us to Hashem, and all of the beautiful aspects of the spiritual accomplishment through Torah study, but it also has the very practical application of knowing how to behave in this world. And the building of the temple is certainly one of our duties. And that's exactly what we are looking towards. So this chapter has basically been concerning the interior floor plan of the temple. We've been studying some complicated details regarding the walls, regarding the gates, the entrances, the balconies, the details of the walls, the cells. And now in Halacha Yudbet, in the 12th Halacha, here in this chapter, we're learning about something called the Mesibah. And the Mesibah is actually a winding staircase. And Maimonides tells us in Halacha Yudbet, Umesibah haita ola mikeren mizrachit tzfonit lekeren tzfonit maravit, shaba hayu olin legagot hataim. There was this winding stairwell, by the aid of which one would ascend to the roofs of the cells. And this winding stairwell began its rise from the northeast corner towards the northwest corner of the temple. Now, first of all, this is a bit confusing because there's a word, and let's look at the word again. The word is misibah, has a connotation of spirality, of curve. But this word, which we've now translated as the winding stairwell itself, according to the Rambam, is also used to describe the chamber within which is found the winding stairwell. So sometimes we're talking about the chamber, and sometimes we're talking about the stairwell within the chamber. Previously, until this particular lesson, we mentioned the Mesibah, we were referring to the passageway. Now, we're going to be talking about the actual stairwell, and through these stairs, one ascends to the roofs of the cells, and we're going to see exactly what the purpose is of this ascent. Now, the stairwell is found in this chamber, which is actually really the fourth chamber in the northern side of the sanctuary. Actually, it is the second on the right. It's the lowest floor of the cells. Remember that according to the Rambam, the cells are divided into floors, and the winding stairwell began at the easternmost point of this particular cell, which is the side closest to the entrance of the ulam. And the purpose, again, of this ascent through these stairs was to arrive at that portion of the building of the structure of the sanctuary called the aliya, which, if you recall, is the second story of the temple itself. It would seem that the height of the roof of the cells reached the entrance, an upper entrance, the upper story of the sanctuary itself, the aliya. And it was through the agency of climbing these winding stairs that one would be able to reach this height, to be able to enter into the second story of the sanctuary. Now, the Rambam here describes to us exactly how one has to walk and the turns and directions that one has to face in when utilizing this very unique winding stairway within the wall of the sanctuary. And I think I'm just going to skip the complicated Hebrew instructions here and just explain to you what it is that he's saying. He describes the climb as follows. In this halacha number 12, one ascended on the winding stairwell facing the west and traversed the entire length of the temple's northern side until reaching the west. That is to say that one would be walking along the northern side, facing the west, until reaching the western side, walking, that would basically bring one a distance of approximately 66 amot, 66 cubits, and one would reach the west. And then, when he reached the west, he would turn towards the south. He walked across the entire length of the western side. That means that he would be proceeding within the ta'im, the cells themselves, approximately 50 amot, until he reached the south. When he reached the south, he turned towards the east. He walked eastward, and now he would begin ascending the remaining height, which would be about 11 amot, until reaching the entrance to the upper story of the temple. Since the entrance to the upper story which is the same level as the roof of the cells, was on the south. Now, the holiness of the upper story of the Holy of Holies, in a way, is even holier than the Holy of Holies itself, as we're going to see in this next halacha. And that is halacha number 13, where we read about the actual entrance through an aperture, a space, in the roof of the Holy of Holies. Halacha number 13, ubepitcha shel aliya hayu shtei klonsot shel erez shebahen olin lagaga shel aliya. At the entrance to the temple's upper story, there were two ladders constructed of cedar, upon which a person would climb to the roof of the upper story, which is actually the roof of the temple building itself. In other words, we're making our way from the roof of the cells up a ladder to the roof of the temple itself. And here, Rashi Psipasin hayu mavdilin ba'aliyah ben gag hakodesh legag kodesh hakodeshim. There were markings. There were small marking posts in the upper story on the roof that differentiated between the roof of the sanctuary and the roof of the Holy of Holies. In other words, these protrusions would indicate an ascending level of holiness, because the level of holiness of the Holy of Holies is higher than that of the Holies, and these markings reminded one of the distinction. In addition to these two marking posts, there were also two curtains that were hung in the upper story of the sanctuary that very much resembled the curtains below that divided between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. So the climber, and we're going to see now what this is all about, is now in the upper story above the Holy of Holies, having come through the entrance and up the ladder. And now the Rambam tells us, V'lulin hayu ptuchin ba'aliyah lebeit kodesh hakodeshim shabahen mishalshalin et ha'umanin b'tevot. In the upper story, there were openings that led down to the Holy of Holies, and through these openings, craftsmen would be lowered down. They would be lowered down by a device, and they would be in a special sort of box. And the Rambam explains to us, Kedei shelo yizono einehem bibeit kodesh hakodeshim, so that, and this is his unique expression, their eyes would not be nourished, would not be satiated from the visage of the Holy of Holies. In other words, so that their eyes would not be able to see, they would not be able to enjoy, derive benefits from gazing at the beauty of the chamber of the Holy of Holies. So let's look at this illustration that's been created by the Temple Institute to understand this very unique halacha. At times, there was some sort of adjustment, or perhaps some sort of fix-it job that had to be done inside the chamber of the Holy of Holies. Perhaps a tile became loose, like that which we see in this illustration, tiles being replaced. And of course, there is a prohibition for any man, even a Kohen, to walk into the Holy of Holies. Only the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, enters into the Holy of Holies, and even then only once a year. That is on Yom Kippur, when he's bringing about the atonement of all of Israel as part of the services we read about in the Torah. But yet there is a situation in which work has to be done in the Holy of Holies, and there is such a concept that when this was necessary, and in fact it did happen occasionally, workmen were lowered from the top, from the roof of the Holy of Holies, through these special apertures in the upper story. And if you notice in this particular illustration, the box is only open, this kind of workman's specially designed scaffolding, this with walls, this workman's booth is only open on the side in which the work is necessary to be done. This is one of our commentaries who teaches that the box in which the craftsman was lowered was closed from three sides and only open from the side in which the work had to be done. And there is actually a prohibition of deriving personal benefit from something that was sanctified. It's called the mi'ilah. One is mo'el, is a person who derives personal benefit from something sanctified. Now, actually, there's a clarification in one of the commentaries, the Tiferet Israel, that this concept of mi'ilah, of the transgression of deriving personal benefit, doesn't apply to sound or to sight or to smell. So that only means, though, that one would not have to bring a sin offering if one did commit this act of mi'ilah, of deriving personal benefit in one of those areas. One wouldn't have to bring the sin offering, but one would still actually be transgressing the isur, the prohibition of deriving the benefit. And in order to prevent this from happening, this kind of workman's booth was designed so that when the fixing or the upkeep work had to be done in the Holy of Holies, then they would be lowered through the top, not coming through the front. That's only done by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and would do that work. And this is actually an interesting idea that we're going to be learning later on in the Rambam in chapter 7, that whether or not there was a particular job of upkeep or something broken or something that had to be attended to, let's say an impure object inadvertently found its way into the Holy of Holies and had to be removed, whether or not any of this situation was applicable, still there was a general principle that once every 7 years the upper story was accessed in the manner that we've described, and they entered the upper story so that they could descend from there to inspect the Holy of Holies to make sure that everything was as it should be. So this was kind of a set schedule, that whether or not there was anything outstanding or outlandish or out of the ordinary taking place in the Holy of Holies, there was a scheduling of an inspection that was done every 7 years, and that was done through the openings in the top story and not through the main entrance of the Holy of Holies. And examining this concept a little bit further, because one could ask a very interesting question, one could be very, very surprised by this idea and wonder how is it possible under any circumstances to go into the Holy of Holies, even through the roof, even through the top. Have we not learned that the Holy of Holies is so sanctified that one can only enter the Kohen Gadol, who's chosen for that purpose, and then only on Yom Kippur? How is it possible to go through the top? And who went in? Was it the Kohen Gadol? Was it any Kohanim? And again, as I mentioned, this is an interesting idea. One of the things that's clarified here is that the sanctity level of this upper story is even greater than that of the lower story of the Holy of Holies, because one does enter into the Holy of Holies, one meaning the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, once a year, but this was only entered into once every 7 years. But interestingly, and this shows a certain aspect of the practicality and the very real-time application of serving Hashem and the reality of the temple, the interesting halacha is, and this is a very interesting language that we find in what's called the Mechilta on Tractate Kelim, the tractate called Kelim, the first parak, the first chapter, tells us that anyone can enter into the Holy of Holies for the sake of building or for the sake of fixing or upkeep, or to take out something that is impure. It is a specific mitzvah. It is particularly praiseworthy for this to be done by Kohanim. In other words, when someone does have to access the Holy of Holies again through the upper story, it should be Kohanim that do this. But ein Kohanim nichnasim leviim. If there are no Kohanim available for this job, perhaps It's a particular type of craftsmanship, and no Kohanim that can be located are familiar with how to do this job. If we can't find Kohanim to do it, so then Levi'im, Nichnasim Levi'im, then a Levite can do it. Ein Levi'im, Nichnasim Yisraelim. If a Levite cannot be found to do this job, then an ordinary Israelite can do it. Mitzvah b'toharim, ein toharim nichnasim tme'im. It's also a mitzvah that one should be pure, be ritually pure in order to enter. But if one cannot be found who can do it who is pure, so then even an impure person would be able to do this job. So this is the concept of the lowering down from the top level into the Holy of Holies, the craftsman. And then Maimonides concludes this particular halacha with the statement, Upam achat bashana mipesach lepesach milabnin et hahechal. He tells us that once a year, on the eve of Passover, the walls of the sanctuary were whitened, were painted. And this is something that we also have mentioned earlier. The source for this statement is actually, again, a Mishnah in Tractate Midot, in the 3rd chapter, Mishnah number 4, that tells us about this concept. However, here it's a little bit difficult to understand the words of the Rambam, I must admit, because we have previously learned that the exterior of the Mikdash, the exterior of the building, is constructed of very fine marble. That we learned actually way back in chapter 1, halacha number 14. And at times, of course, in different periods, especially during the period of the Second Temple, this was coated with gold. And we also learned that the interior part of the temple was also, generally speaking, covered with gold. So there is an issue as to which part of the temple was whitened, especially because the word which Maimonides used here, he says, Upam achat bashana mipesach lefesach milabnin et hahechal. Whitening it, the word here actually implies there's a type of cement, and it certainly seems a little bit strange that these attractive surfaces would be covered with cement. And so there are some sources who imply that the Rambam is talking about the ceiling, and there are different opinions regarding exactly what this concept is that Maimonides is referring to. In any event, the concept of the entrance through the top of the upper story shows us something of the great sanctity of the building of the sanctuary itself, and how even in terms of the upkeep and everything that had to be done in order to ensure that the temple was on a level that could provide for its functioning, the rules of sanctity were followed. Thus, having concluded the 4th chapter of Maimonides Hilchot Beit HaBechira, in the next chapter, chapter 5, we're going to be studying about the actual Temple Mount itself. And this should be a very, very important point for us to be able to clarify many of the questions that a lot of us have about the topography of the Temple Mount. Especially one of the most confusing issues that faces many people is understanding exactly when we refer to the Temple Mount, are we referring to the sanctified area, the degrees of sanctity, where exactly on the Temple Mount did the temple stand. These are some of the most important issues today facing those who are active with ascending to the Temple Mount. And of course, the whole principle of rebuilding revolves around understanding the topography of the Temple Mount. And so we're just going to begin now the first entry, Halacha Aleph, of the 5th chapter. And the next time, as we continue our study in the Rambam, we're going to delve into this chapter, which holds for us a tremendous amount of information and some surprises as well. The first thing that the Rambam tells us in this chapter is Har Habayit v'hu Har HaMoriah haya 500 amah al 500 amah. The Temple Mount, which is known as Mount Moriah, was 500 cubits by 500 cubits. We're going to see that Mount Moriah is actually an expression that comes from the word hora'ah, which actually means instruction. The idea that the knowledge of the Torah went forth from the Temple Mount through the Sanhedrin who dwelled there in its chamber, went forth to the entire world. And Har HaMoriah, Mount Moriah, the word Moriah is also based on the root yira, fear, meaning awe and reverence, because a true fear of God went forth, was broadcast to the entire world, was found on the Temple Mount through the resting of the divine presence. And that, of course, is the goal of the Holy Temple, to bring about that level of understanding, bringing to awe and reverence of God for Israel and all of humanity, the light to Israel and the light to the nations.
Light to the Nations is produced by the Temple Institute, Jerusalem, Israel. Dedications are available for upcoming Light to the Nations teachings. To make a dedication, please visit templeinstitute.org, the multimedia section, Light to the Nations, or email us at temple@temple.org.il. Your dedications help to make these productions possible.